We do have breaking news this morning. Sources telling CNN that the January 6th committee will likely reach out to the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas here in the coming weeks. This happens after text messages between Ginny Thomas and then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows showed her urging President Trump's team to continue the big lie, to keep pressing on, trying to say that they'd won the election. Joining us now is CNN national security reporter Zachary Cohen and CNN correspondent and co-anchor of CNN's Early Start, Laura Jarrett. Okay, Zach, first, just walk us through this. What is the committee thinking of doing here?
Well, Brianna, sources are telling me and my colleague Jamie Gingell that the committee is likely to reach out to the wife of sitting Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas within the next couple of weeks and maybe sooner. Now, it's really important because our sources are telling us that most of the members of the committee, including the chairman and the vice chairman, Representative Benny Thompson and Congresswoman Liz Cheney, are both on board with this. Now, it remains to be seen how exactly they plan to do that reach out, if they do it quietly or if they do it via subpoena. The committee has previously not ruled out a subpoena for anybody in this investigation. So it's another step forward since we've seen those text messages, those 29 text messages from Ginny Thomas to Mark Meadows, President Donald Trump's former chief of staff. Now, they're pretty explosive, and we've covered those extensively, but the committee has some questions.
Yeah, and I think there's a big question of, if you're Mark Meadows or you're another White House aide, are you looking at texts from Clarence Thomas's wife and thinking there's an indication of support from the Supreme Court? That is a big question. She mentions her best friend in one of the texts. What do we need to know about this one?
Well, there's no clear evidence that she is directly referring to her husband in that text message, but she and her husband have both referred to each other as their best friend publicly before. Now, I think we have a few clips where they've done that in the past.
I love to spend time with my wife, who's totally my best friend in the whole world. My wife is totally my best friend.
Now, again, CNN has not been able to confirm that Ginny Thomas is referring to her husband in that text message, but it raises more questions about potential overlap between her conservative activism and the Supreme Court, a sitting Supreme Court justice's role on the court, especially in an investigation that could bring cases to the Supreme Court in the future.
Yeah, Laura, looking at these texts, why are these so alarming to the committee?
Well, you would think it has to be, given her position, as Zach just laid out, as the wife of a sitting Supreme Court justice, a justice who is ruling on election cases related to January 6th, and in the days after the election related to cases having to do with just election procedures in general, cases I should mention he did not recuse from, despite the fact that his wife is corresponding with the then chief of staff. And just it shows sort of the deep level of conspiracy theories that she has bought into. She is way down the looking glass on some of these. And whether or not it raises any criminal exposure for her, I think remains to be seen, just because we don't have the full story here. We've seen 29 text messages out of thousands of pages that Mark Meadows has released, but we know that he has held back a fair amount as well. We don't know everybody else that she was texting. There's reporting out there suggesting that she was texting members of Congress. And so the committee is going to have a lot of questions about what else was she saying? What were people saying back to her? And there's also this curious gap in time. After November 24th, weeks after the election, things then go dark until about January 10th, when she then starts texting Meadows, and back and forth the exchanges happen again. So the committee is going to have some questions about what happened during those intervening weeks as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, they're going to want to know who her best friend is,
yep.
Right? And we should also point out, Laura, I think this is significant, because if you're considering, is there a line of demarcation between Ginny Thomas and Clarence Thomas, there is a data point that makes you question that, which is Clarence Thomas, in a key decision, was the lone holdout, right?
He was the lone holdout when it came to those tranches of documents that were supposed to go to the National Archives, and they eventually did go to the National Archives, despite the fact that Thomas objected to it. Now, again, we don't know whether Ginny Thomas had any documents at issue in those, but the fact that he's ruling on those cases and not recused just shows the limits of the recusal issue here. Remember that it's essentially up to the justices. A lot of people have sort of balked at that and been surprised that there isn't a sort of more strong way to hold the justices accountable, but the Supreme Court essentially operates on an honor system. There's a federal law requiring recusal when your impartiality would be questioned. You would think this might be one of those instances, but who is supposed to enforce that when the Supreme Court is essentially the highest court that would be able to rule on an issue?
We'll keep watching this. Zach and Laura, thanks to you both.
Sure.
Herman?
So our CNN team's hearing several explosions through the night near the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. Plus, we're getting word of Russian forces trying to create a corridor there to cut off supplies. We're live on the ground next. And Ukraine vowing to investigate a video that appears to show its soldiers shooting Russian prisoners of war in the leg. Stand by for news.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Good morning to our viewers here in the United States and around the world. It is Monday, March 28th. I'm Brianna Keeler, and John Berman is in Lviv, Ukraine this morning. Breaking overnight, loud explosions rocking Kyiv. Our CNN team on the ground in the capital city, hearing constant explosions there. An advisor to President Zelensky warning that Russia is ramping up its military strikes and that Vladimir Putin is trying to wipe Ukraine off the face of the earth. We are also getting some reports of powerful explosions in the last few hours in the western city of Zhytomyr. A Ukrainian military official says a fuel depot was hit by a missile that was fired from Belarus. With a new round of peace talks set to begin Tuesday in Istanbul, Zelensky is saying that Ukraine is ready to accept neutral, non-nuclear status under certain conditions.
Our priorities in the negotiations are known. Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity are beyond doubt. Effective security guarantees for our state are mandatory. Our goal is obvious: peace and the restoration of normal life in our native state as soon as possible.
So I should tell you, just a couple minutes ago here in Lviv, the air raid sirens did go off. The air raid sirens did go off, a warning for people in this city to take shelter. We are watching the situation here very closely. In the meantime, I do want to note that we're getting more evidence of the destruction over the rest of the country. Kharkiv is in ruins. Ukrainian officials say that Russian forces are now firing at a nuclear research facility there. In Mariupol, Ukrainian officials claimed 40,000 residents have been forcibly taken from the city into Russian territories, placed into what they're calling filtration camps. And here in the western city of Lviv, which is just 50 miles from the Polish border, the Russians hit a fuel storage tank with at least one cruise missile over the weekend, which is why, of course, we're paying very close attention to the air raid warnings in this city right now. Also new, Ukraine's military chief says that he believes Vladimir Putin is seeking to split Ukraine into two, using the post-war division between North and South Korea as a model. And this morning, Ukraine is vowing to conduct an immediate investigation after video surfaced of soldiers shooting Russian prisoners in the knees. I'm joined here in Lviv by CNN's Phil Black. Phil, we did just hear those air raid sirens moments ago. A warning, and the reason it is notable is not just for safety reasons, but also because this appears to be something the Russians are now doing. These missile strikes on key infrastructure locations all over the country.
Yeah, indeed. They're using their cruise missiles to pick off, knock out, supply logistics support sites across the country. That's what we've been seeing for some days now. That's what we saw here in the city of Lviv over the weekend with that fuel depot that was hit, another military site, support site as well. And yes, overnight, at least one other fuel storage site has been hit. We've seen them in Mykolaiv, we've seen them in Kyiv as well, all just in a few days. It's a clear effort to knock out the supply, the logistics, the support that keeps the Ukrainian military moving and, crucially, keeps them shooting. Because without that, the defense will falter. Shifting gears a little, I want to talk about a video that has surfaced, which shows Ukrainian soldiers seemingly shooting Russian captives in the legs. We've seen these pictures which show at least 3 soldiers being shot in the legs, others on the ground with severe leg injuries, which it suggests it's also happened to them. There is also some verbal and physical abuse that these captives experience. This was in the east of the country near the city of Kharkiv. The Ukrainian government, a senior advisor to the Ukrainian government, says it's taking this very seriously. They will investigate. This isn't acceptable. If it is proven to be true, this is not how the Ukrainian forces should behave. But the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense says that they ask everyone to keep in mind that the Russians also stage these sorts of tapes as part of their information warfare. Not referencing this video specifically, but they say that the Russians do that. So If true, it is certainly an ugly episode, but one that the Ukrainians say is being investigated.
All right, Phil Black this morning. Great to have you here. Phil, thank you very much. Brianna?
President Zelensky saying that Ukrainian troops have discovered Russian ceremonial uniforms. He believes that Russian forces were planning to celebrate with a victory parade in Kyiv after just 3 or 4 days. CNN's R.E.VENGE is live for us in Istanbul with more on this. This is something that he's pointing to as sort of failed expectations again on the part of Vladimir Putin, Arwa.
That's right, Brianna. And we have been seeing a number of similar indications in the sense that the sense is that Russia most certainly expected to this be, relatively speaking, fairly easy, fairly quick, not quite anticipating or really preparing for the level of resistance they have been getting on the ground. And now, yes, President Zelensky pointing to these uniforms as further evidence of that. Take a listen.
Did you know that we found their dress uniforms? I don't know if you know this or not, but it's a bit funny. It would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. How they were preparing to hold a parade at the Independence Square, basically to ride through it on the 3rd or 4th day.
And of course, Brianna, for Ukraine, for the population there, for President Zelensky, the key right now is trying to figure out some sort of peace agreement. And to that note, we are expecting face-to-face talks to be taking place once again in Turkey. This would be the 5th time that both sides would be speaking. The second meeting to be taking place in Turkey this time is going to be happening in Istanbul. And both sides have, to a certain degree, managed to come closer together. Ukraine, for example, now saying that it is willing to accept non-nuclear neutral status. Basically, what does this mean? If Ukraine does end up being a neutral state, that would effectively mean that they would not be able to get involved in any sort of third-party conflict, which would de facto mean that they would not be able to, at least for the time being, be a member of NATO, which, remember, was one of the underlying reasons, justifications that Russia was using for launching this invasion of Ukraine. Another key thing to be looking at is whether or not these humanitarian corridors can actually be opened in greater numbers and opened with real security guarantees for those who so desperately need them. Another key point that Ukraine is making at this stage, too, is that if any sort of agreement is to be negotiated, is to be implemented, Ukraine would be looking to have some sort of a referendum. Zelensky wants to ensure that the population is in fact behind him as he does try to move this process forward. And of course, key as well, any sort of agreement go beyond just a signature on paper, be something that is actually going to be implemented. A lot of wariness, understandably, when it comes to Russia's intentions going into this next round of talks.
Yeah, and that's what we will be watching them so carefully with you. Arwa, thank you so much live for us from Istanbul. Berman?
All right, the breaking news here from Lviv. We did hear the air raid sirens go off just moments ago. We're watching the skies very carefully. Obviously, there was a missile attack on this city over the weekend. The head of Ukraine's military intelligence is now warning that President Putin could be looking to carve this country in two, something like North and South Korea. I want to bring in Colonel Cedric Leighton. He's a CNN military analyst and retired Air Force Colonel. Cedric, thanks so much for being with us. You know, if you're talking about this kind of partition, what could that
side to deal with, but that would be, I think, the Russian thinking would be to take this and make this part of their sphere of influence.
Yeah, the former situation there would be something of a concession for the Russians. It would mean they would maybe leave the positions they've occupied in and around Kyiv, even though they haven't successfully been able to push toward the city. Cedric, the air raid sirens went off here moments ago. Obviously, there was an airstrike on this city over the weekend, and then a series of strikes on these fuel or infrastructure installation centers kind of all around the country. Will you just show people on the map where Lviv is and where the Russians are shooting from and what they're shooting at?
Sure, John. Lviv is right here, where you are right now. Now, where the Russians are shooting at includes the cities of Lutsk, R.E.VENGE, and Zhytomyr right here, those three cities that are right in the northwestern part of the country. Where they're shooting from includes Belarus. So they're shooting remotely, basically. What they're doing is they're going in and they're taking these standoff weapons that they have, using them to target various areas that are, very conveniently, on the supply lines that the Ukrainians need in order to sustain their war effort.
Because the supplies are coming from where, Colonel?
They're coming from Poland primarily, right here, Slovakia to a lesser extent, Hungary to a lesser extent, and Romania. So those are the areas where the supplies are coming in from, and this is why the Russians want to, in essence, cut off these supplies and make it very difficult for the supplies to reach places like Kyiv or Kharkiv or Dnipro or any of the other cities that the Ukrainians are trying to defend or retake.
I'm going to misquote, General Omar Bradley, who effectively said, what do you say, tactics are for amateurs, logistics are for professionals. What can this do? If you're blowing up fuel storage areas and other logistical centers the Ukrainians need, how disruptive can that be to the Ukrainian efforts to fight back?
It can be absolutely critical, John. One of the key things here, if we go in, let's just take a look at the Kyiv area, for instance, just to describe some of this. If you cut off the logistical support here, it would be impossible for the Ukrainians to even mount any kind of effort against Russian forces that are present to the northwest and the northeast of the city. They've already done a lot to move these forces back. It's a very difficult thing for them to do, but without any of those logistic supplies, it's going to be impossible for them to move forward. They need guns, they need ammo, they need food, they need fuel, just like the Russians did. And we have to remember, down in this area, remember that 40-mile convoy that was so famous or infamous that the Russians had that didn't go anywhere because of lack of fuel, lack of parts. All of those things would then be the Ukrainians' problems, and that would be disastrous for their war effort.
All right, needless to say, we're watching that all very closely. Colonel Cedric Layton, thanks for helping us understand it. Appreciate it.
You bet, John.
Right, I'm John Berman, live in Lviv in western Ukraine. Can you hear that? Those are the air raid sirens. We actually believe these sirens are an all clear. About half an hour ago, the sirens first went off, warning people to take shelter. Obviously, people paying very close attention to this now, given that this city was the target of a Russian missile strike over the weekend, a fuel storage center hit. But what you're hearing now, we believe to be the all clear. That is what they do after they feel that the situation has stabilized. I'll keep you posted as we monitor these developments. Separately, a new hit to the Russian economy. Heineken announced it will pull its business out of Russia. The brewing company had already halted new investments there. I should say absence and exports to Russia. Heineken says it will lose more than $430 million from this move. Brianna?
Well, the White House is walking back those comments that President Joe Biden made over the weekend, calling Russian President Vladimir Putin a butcher who cannot remain in power.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
As you know, and as you've heard us say repeatedly, we do not have a strategy of regime change in Russia or anywhere else for that matter.
Joining us now is Joel Rubin. He's the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, and Kimberly Dozier, CNN Global Affairs analyst and Time Magazine contributor. Joel, to you first. What did you think of what the president said?
Well, Brianna, he spoke from the heart clearly. And I think for anybody who would say that Vladimir Putin staying in power is a good thing, they clearly are misreading the entire environment that we're in right now. And so for the president, this speech was a capstone of an incredibly successful week. Significant diplomacy with our allies. There is unity across the board with the G7, the European Union, clearly with Ukraine. And it's the kind of success that we can really build on. So while he made the statement that got people thinking about that statement, the whole picture is a very successful trip.
Can I just want to ask you about something on that, because I understand Joe Biden speaking from his heart when he's talking to storm victims or he's empathizing with someone. Can you really talk from the heart when you're discussing whether a world leader should stay or go, considering this was not in his prepared remarks?
Yeah, I think, look, after 22 years of Vladimir Putin, we've seen what he brings to the table, which is murder of his political opponents, invading neighboring countries, launching this cataclysmic war towards Ukraine, destroying his own economy, as was just discussed. So Joe Biden is making an argument that, frankly, this man in power has brought a lot of misery across the board. So it is a harsh statement. It clearly has gotten people thinking about it, and people should be thinking about it. It's not American policy for regime change, obviously, but saying that Putin is somehow qualified to still be in power and that that's the right thing to do, I think that would be an argument that people shouldn't be making.
What do you think?
Well, I don't think it's obvious that regime change is not the U.S. policy when he says something like that. It was indisciplined. It was a speech where the world was watching, and Biden handed a gift to Russian propagandists. It's been Putin's line all along that this isn't about Ukrainian sovereignty, that really this is the U.S. versus Russia, and the U.S. wants to change the government. Now they had their statement that for them proves that. And I don't think this was a moment to ruin all of the other things from the visit that were great in terms of lining up NATO countries together, showing unity, and then saying something also that you're not prepared to follow through with. So, as Putin remains in power year after year from here on out, it becomes a way of undermining Biden's power. You said something that you didn't make happen. It was just sort of wishful thinking. So that's why I was disappointed in it.
Well, I think those are fair points, but Biden is a couple of steps ahead on this whole situation. If we remember about a month ago or so, there was this question about SWIFT banking and whether or not SWIFT would be used to sanction Russia. And there was a question, why are we not doing it? And President Biden said, well, Europe's not there yet. And then within 24 hours, Europe fell in line and the SWIFT banking system was closed off to Russia, a significant penalty. So President Biden is making an argument that, frankly, does get people thinking about how could Russia become part of the global community again with Vladimir Putin running that country? Can they really get taken off of sanctions? Can they really be trusted? Can Ukraine be next to a Russia with Vladimir Putin running it? That doesn't mean the U.S. is going to go in and do regime change, but it does mean that people have to be thinking big picture here while this policy goes forward, because we are in it for the long haul. I think that's the key theme from the week, is that this is not going to be a 1 or 2 week dynamic. This is months, years potentially of clash.
Well, then he should be prepared to lay out the strategy. If he is signaling that this is a change in policy from the White House, that they do want regime change, then you got to be prepared to back that up. But this was supposed to be, it was right after the part of his speech where he was messaging and reaching out to the Russian people. So it sounded like he was calling on them to overthrow their leader. And in that case, I think it sort of, if you're going to do that while also saying we don't want to risk giving jets and other things that Ukraine is asking for, because that would risk World War III, this seemed to be going way over the threat of transferring some more lethal aid to Ukraine.
Let me just ask you real quick, Joel, before we wrap this up. Yeah. Do you think what Biden said should be the U.S. policy?
No, I don't think regime change should be our policy, and I don't think that the United States has been successful in regime change policies over the last 2 decades. But to not speak the truth about how this is a dynamic that for the Russian people is a disaster, that for Europe is a disaster, and to lean into the idea that we need to be united, that would be a mistake for the president to not do. So he certainly was speaking with an animus that shows that the near neighbors are frightened. He was just in Poland and all around the region, and they do not want Russia breathing down their neck like they are to Ukraine.
Joel, Reuben, Kim Dozier, thank you so much to both of you. Appreciate it.